We want to welcome those joining us online and to those joining us here at the Wisconsin Energy Institute for another installment of our Sustainable Energy Seminar Series. If this is your first time joining us for one of our programs, my name is Scott Williams. I'm the Research and Education Coordinator here at the Wisconsin Energy Institute, and also the director of this series and instructor for students who are taking this for credit. So the Sustainable Energy Seminar is held every other Monday in the fall and the spring. And our goal is to highlight the cutting edge research that's going on here at UW-Madison and elsewhere, and showcase how different disciplines are understanding energy challenges and developing solutions. So throughout the series, you'll hear from folks in the social sciences and humanities, as well as science and engineering, to get a more interdisciplinary perspective on sustainable energy challenges and solutions. The seminar is open to the public, and it's also a course for students in the undergraduate Engineering for Energy Sustainability certificate, as well as the Master's in Sustainable System Engineering. And we present these in a hybrid format, so you're always welcome to join us here at the Wisconsin Energy Institute, or you can sign up for the Zoom webinar. We've got one more seminar coming up for this fall, and then we'll resume back at the end of January for the spring semester. For those joining on Zoom, live captioning is available. You can click the Show Captions button to turn that feature on. And if you do have a question for our presenter, please use the Q&A, and I'll make sure to flag her down if there's any questions from our online audience. And if we have questions here in the room here, I'll pass the mic on to you so that our folks online can hear. So with that, I'll introduce today's speaker. Dr. Erin Hamilton is an assistant professor of design studies here at UW-Madison. Her scholarship lies at the intersection of sustainable design and environmental psychology, and is exploring how conservation behavior may be shaped through environmental and social cues in green buildings. So her work encourages designers to think about the spillover effects that sustainable environments can have on those who are inside. Welcome.
All right, thank you. I'm really excited to be here. I always love getting to go and speak with different audiences. So I teach in design studies. I teach primarily in the interior architecture side of the department, capstone studio and research methods. And my background is in psychology primarily. And so I come at design and looking at the design of interior space through the perspective of psychology, and how do spaces that we craft influence people's behavior, and in this work kind of beyond behavior, how is the green spaces that we inhabit, how are these spaces shaping how aware people are about climate change, about their own energy use, and about ways to reduce their energy consumption. And so we're looking at what do green buildings say? And I happen to learn from our 3 wonderful in-person audience members today, just since this is my first time in this building, that we're occupying a LEED certified building. And we're going to be talking about green buildings today. And so if you hadn't previously worked in the building or attended a tour, maybe, I would ask you, were you aware of the fact that you're occupying a sustainable building today? And what are the cues that kind of tell you that? And that's what I'm looking at in my research. So to kind of set the stage for us, and why are we looking at sustainable environments, built environments, and also behavior? As I'm sure you're already aware, sustainable building industry is a really large global industry. But from a people perspective, we spend about 90% of our lives indoors. We're spending a lot of time in indoor built environments, and variations in human behavior can really impact how a building performs. I just heard a really interesting, kind of funny anecdote last week. I was at Green Build Conference, which is put on by the US GBC, the Green Building Council, and they were talking about doing their energy measuring once the building is open to occupancy and people are in, and they were seeing these really bizarre spikes in energy consumption overnight when this retail facility was closed. They just couldn't make sense of it. And then they went and actually talked to the occupants and found out from the staff that they didn't have air conditioning at home, and the staff had been sleeping there overnight. So that's a really extreme example of the benchmarks we set for energy consumption of a sustainable building or any other building can swing drastically in one way or another based on what the occupants themselves are actually doing. So the buildings and construction in general, globally, is consuming a lot of energy. It's about a third of all global energy consumption is our buildings and construction processes and the products. 28% of that is the operations of the buildings themselves. So things that you all as engineers are very familiar with, things like the HVAC systems, and human behavior contributes to this. So this is a critical consideration in the energy performance of buildings. And so my research is bringing to this issue and this problem the suggestion that we might want to consider how to leverage sustainable buildings for educational purposes and for encouraging occupants to adopt environmentally responsible behaviors that can significantly reduce their energy consumption, their greenhouse gas emissions in green buildings. So green buildings can serve as teaching tools. They've been called a three-dimensional classroom, and they can support occupants learning about environmental issues and adopting more environmentally responsible behaviors. And when we think about engaging occupants in sustainability issues, green buildings are really rich contexts for teaching about a number of environmental issues, not just energy, but we can see issues related to water cycles, geography, urban infrastructure, how the building connects with larger cycles of material use and reuse and degradation and local ecologies. And yet, despite all of these rich opportunities for education and for maybe prompting and nudging behavior in more positive directions, the social and pedagogical value of green buildings are lost without clear and engaging communication strategies. So my talk today might be a little bit of a divergence from some things you typically encounter in engineering, where you're focused on the engineered, the product or the process that's conserving the energy. But now we're thinking about how do we take that technological innovation in green buildings and do the science communication of communicating that to the occupants that inhabit those buildings in order to get the teaching potential out of those settings. So when we think about what shapes environmentally responsible behavior, there's a lot of factors. Behavior isn't just determined by one factor. A really common model a long time ago, so a really outdated model, is that if we just educate people, they'll do better, right? But it's not that simple. Any of us who have ever tried to change a habit know that just learning more about why you should change that habit doesn't help you to get there, right? Behavior is multiply determined, and a lot of the prevailing psychological literature can be summed down into these three domains. We have the situational context that people inhabit. That may be the physical environment that they're in, the policies and infrastructure in their surrounding environment, their financial and time capacity. A really simple example of that is I previously was a professor at an institution in Texas. And shockingly, even though this was only 3 years ago, there's no recycling in my building, no recycling bins anywhere to be found, right? So the physical environment of that building definitely was a deterrent to people being able to recycle. There wasn't the option, right? The financial and time capacity. In order for someone to recycle in that city, we had to the city didn't pick up recycling. We had to either take the recycling ourselves to the recycling center or pay a service to come pick up the recycling to take to a recycling center. So then you get into issues of financial privilege and who's able to participate in those activities. A number of personal or psychological factors contribute to behavior. Knowledge and awareness is one thing, but we're also drastically influenced by our personally held values, our motivations, the behaviors that we find satisfying, our locus of control, which is the extent to which we believe our behaviors are within our control, or we are highly influenced by external factors, the extent to which we believe what's going on with the environment is our own personal responsibility, or if it's somebody else's, and also the mental capacity. Do we have the bandwidth mentally to be able to think about adopting or changing behaviors or doing things that may be a little less convenient, right? We're also highly influenced by social norms, though humans notoriously underestimate the extent to which they are influenced by social norms. So all of these things contribute to environmentally responsible behavior, and recent work has sought to better understand the role specifically of the built environment in nudging or touching upon some of these variables in order to influence behavior. So the capacity of the built environment, or the potential of the built environment to be able to give people some additional knowledge, to increase their awareness about the environment, to make them think about their own personal responsibility with respect to climate change, to shape and form social norms. Good example, going back to our unnamed building in an unnamed city in Texas where there was no recycling. How can we seek to create a healthy and positive social norm around recycling when nobody sees each other recycling, right? So if it's not there, there can't be a good social norm around it. And where my research has recently been going is looking at how knowledge of green building features in sustainable buildings significantly predicts and supports occupants engaging in more environmentally responsible behaviors. So just knowing that you're in a green building and being able to identify specific features of the building that contribute to the building's sustainability has been shown to support increased environmentally responsible behavior. And so here are some of the questions I look at in my research is how does a green building prime eco behavior? How does it allow or permit for different eco behaviors? And how does it actually promote those behaviors? So some questions that I've looked at in my research and continue to look at is, does the building communicate a culture of sustainability? Does the building foster opportunities for environmental education? And what are the most effective ways to do that? How are eco behaviors promoted within green buildings? And from conservation psychology, what are the evidence-based best practices to actually promote behavior in green buildings? And so we come to kind of this question that I put out for you is, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody hears it, what's the end of that? Does it make a sound, right? So our question is, if a building is sustainable and nobody knows it, we have to wonder, yes, it's doing all the things that it's supposed to do in terms of decreasing emissions, being more environmentally responsible in terms of its energy and water and materials use, but we're not getting any benefit of the behavior, right? And the interesting thing about behavior is people can take the lessons they learn potentially in this building, and they carry those with them to all the other contexts that they inhabit. So we have some real opportunity in these green buildings to create some more awareness, appeal to different value sets, and help shift behavior in a positive direction. And so for this talk today, I wanted to focus a little bit more on how do we translate green building design, whether it's energy efficient HVAC or renewable energies or things like that. How do we translate that to the building occupant in an effective way? And in some of my research, I've looked at just how the green building design holistically, or some other researchers have referred to this as atmospherics, how the atmospherics of the green building influence knowledge and behavior. So does the building communicate a culture of sustainability? And then we'll look more about specific intentional green building communications. So didactic features specifically designed to educate occupants. And that could be signage, exhibits, digital displays, giving feedback about behavior. And we're asking here, how can we communicate stories of exciting sustainable design strategies within green buildings? And how do we promote behaviors in those ways? So I'm going to start here with a lovely image of an interior of a building and a quote from some occupant interviews I recently did at the Universities of Maryland at Shady Grove. And this was a LEED Platinum biomedical sciences and engineering building. And it was designed with biophilic intent. Biophilia, in case you're not familiar, is, heard a chuckle. Are we familiar with this? Oh, I thought you chuckled in.
Deviations.
Oh, yeah, I don't think it's on the DSM-5. No, it just, it's not. It's a biophilic design or biophilia is a psychological theory that relates to humans' innate love of nature. We are drawn innately to like natural patterns, forms, shapes, multisensory stimuli. They are associated with reduced stress, cognitive clarity, preference for environments, productivity, et cetera. So biophilic design strategies are ones that are meant to enhance human health and happiness through a number of features. So natural materials, colors, daylighting, multi-sensory connection to natural elements like water. So being able to touch, feel, hear water in the environment. You see this green wall in here, so live plants. And this is actually a pretty unique building. I don't know if it looks unique to you in your experience of engineering buildings, but a lot of times what we see when people do biophilic design is they'll say, oh, well, we have views to nature. The nature is always on the outside. Or we have some indoor plants. And we're not really thinking about holistically, how are we bringing daylight into this space, using a lot of natural materials on the inside as well. They were even doing some really subtle things here with biomimicry, or kind of mimicking the shape of plants in their movable ottomans here. So there's some interesting things going on. It's in Maryland, and I would have to look at a map to actually.
It's away from the main.
It's away from the main campus, and it's like 9 colleges and universities in Maryland have disciplines that come to this campus for their study. Yeah. So in asking we did some surveys with building occupants looking at their environmentally responsible behaviors, self-report, and also asking them to identify sustainable design features within their building and what they know to be true about that building. But these are quotes, I have this slide in the next, that include some excerpts from occupants that I interviewed, having them think about the sustainability of the building and kind of their impression of that. So getting to this culture of sustainability. And this person said, it really kind of makes you more aware. And that makes you really think about the impact that you have and the changes that you can make and what you do to try to incorporate the same types of things that they're trying to do by operating an energy efficient building. So we have this occupant talking about, I'm really reflecting on my own behavior because of being in this green building that I know is so energy efficient. I'm trying to think about what else can I do. We had another occupant say, I think the building lends itself to making you think about those things versus not. I think when you see it, it reminds you. I think it reminds me of the mission and the vision behind the building. And I think because we know that it was built with a purpose, I think it changes how you think about things while you're there. So we're not seeing a lot of high level understanding of energy systems in the building, but we're seeing some evidence here of how these atmospherics, or kind of just the aesthetic and visual of the building, is communicating this culture of sustainability and giving the occupants some expectation about what the shared value systems are in this space. So let's get to looking more specifically about communicating information. So green building communications, there's a lot of challenges with how do we communicate green building design. Now, I haven't had a lot of time yet to walk around this building, but you got a big sign. So do we have like one big sign, or are there signs dispersed throughout the building? Yeah, like this. Great.
But we have one big sign that has like sustainable features of this building somewhere. I can't remember.
We do have one big sign, and then there might be another sign about the sustainable furniture.
Yeah.
Recycled wood.
Okay, great. So, so there's a variety of ways that we communicate building sustainability to occupants, and there's a lot of challenges. One of the main challenges from, I think, an architecture interior design perspective is people can sometimes be really hesitant to put up too many signs in the building. They don't want to deter from the aesthetic of the building, and also an overwhelming amount of signage can lead to visual overload, and we don't want to do that to occupants. Signage or exhibits like the one on the left, this is kind of an energy dashboard model. This can sometimes be associated with digital blindness, and that is a psychological response that people have sometimes when they expect digital content to be not interesting. They will tune it out entirely. So they may not even be aware that their building has a very large energy dashboard in the lobby, because they just assume this is uninteresting information, right? And then that's lost potential for educating people. Sometimes signage has just really dense technical information, because who's writing the signage? From having attended Green Build this last week, it's architects, it's engineers, it's the people who are the specialists in the technology, in the innovation that's gone into the building, and they're the ones writing it. So you can imagine that somebody not trained in that discipline would have a hard time understanding it. Signage can often lack visual interest. This doesn't really pull you to the side of the hallway and say, oh, let me go see what that's about. It's wall-to-wall text. It's a little too dense. And unfortunately, signage a lot of times is an afterthought, maybe printed out and slapped on the wall with painter's tape, right? That's not very great. So lots of challenges there. So some work that I've been doing recently with collaborators is trying to bring in this perspective of mindful awareness. And we're pulling from the field of ecotourism, which is an informal education environment where people are, free choice exploring, and they may be pulled aside, their attention lured to explore a feature that is there. We're thinking about how to engage people with the physical environment as they're informally exploring. And we hypothesize that in order to support environmentally responsible behaviors, mindful awareness helps people to notice your environment, to be more situationally aware, would help people to see the tangible effects of their behavior. And mindful awareness is associated with an openness to learn more. And so we, my colleagues and I have adapted a model from ecotourism called the mindfulness model for green building communications. And we're looking at these possible outcomes of green building knowledge and then also environmentally responsible behaviors, and trying to articulate what are the different characteristics of engaging in educational exhibits. And so we have mindful engagement, including variety and change, some dynamic elements, multisensory media. I'm going to go over these more in the coming slides, so I'll skip to the next. We want to support behavior. So thinking about promoting behavior through the signage that we include in green buildings by having a clear call to action. So telling people this building is doing this sustainable thing or saving energy in this way. Here's how you can save energy. And maybe that's through interacting with some feature of the environment, or maybe that's through implementation of a similar behavior in their home life in that other domain. We also want signage to be legible, which you would think would be the bare minimum, and yet we see a lot of signage that isn't legible for people, both in at a basic level, the font choices that are used to be visually accessible, and then also simple language and using a balance of text and visuals. Now, I think because of time, I might go through some of these a little quicker, but I'm happy to make the slides available to people afterwards. But yeah, balance of text and visuals. We should think about people who speak multiple different languages being able to understand whatever visual kind of graphic is presented. We're using simple language, avoiding technical jargon, and then font choices, emphasizing contrast, avoiding all capital letters except for limited emphasis. Here's kind of a big domain of the model. It's how do we engage people? How do we foster that mindful engagement? And we do this by incorporating some variety or change. That means that not all of our signs look exactly the same, so that people start to tune them out because they've habituated to them. But we have some change. Maybe that's some variation in font size, color, shape. We can think about multisensory elements that engage more than one sense. So are we just giving visual displays, or do we have something that people could touch or hear, a sound? Can it be interactive in some way where we're not just looking at a visual 2D static piece of signage, but is there a touch screen where people could learn more? Or increasingly in some projects I'm consulting on, people are using QR codes where they could scan and go learn some more about the building. Or going back to really analog, just museum kind of strategies of being able to lift a flap or having a clear cutout so that you can see this cool insulation inside of a building. Really thinking about making the green building an interactive, exploratory kind of museum. Some cognitive engagement, so prompting reflection through a thought-provoking statement, a question to building occupants, and then connecting with the target audience. So something that connects to, maybe living in Wisconsin or Badgers or engineers, targeting our messaging specifically to the audience. And then lastly, we want to support behavior. So locating signage as much as possible in proximity to the feature, which is why sometimes we often recommend, rather than a single display that tells us all the information about the green building, sprinkling those interpretive features throughout the building next to maybe a view of the rain collection and water processing cistern, or a view of the green roof or the solar panels or things like that. We try to include a clear call to action. So you may think, well, what are occupants going to do about solar panels? There's nothing with which they can interact, but we could prompt a behavior or towards using renewable energy or sourcing their home energy from renewable sources in their home context. And then lastly, we're looking at messaging variety. So providing a variety of types of information that appeal to different value orientations. So often what we see in green building communications is a lot of declarative information that's describing the facts. But what people need in order to make decisions and make changes about their behavior is actually 3 different types of information. We need to know about facts. We also need to have instructions about behavior, so how to do something in order to accomplish that energy savings goal. And then we also need to have some effectiveness information that tells us, if you do this behavior, how effective is it going to be? How much energy are you going to save over the course of a year or in a given semester? We also want to appeal to different types of values. So overwhelmingly, this may be obvious to everybody, but overwhelmingly, green building signage tends to appeal to biospheric or environmentally sensitive values, but not everybody is motivated to save the planet, right? A lot of people may be motivated by self-interest, right? How is this going to affect the money that I save or the student fees I have to pay? So these are valid values as well that we can think about leveraging some of our behaviors to appeal to these values. And then there's also social values. So what is the benefit to my community and to my peers? So I'm going to go through a few case studies. I conducted some of my dissertation research actually here at UW-Madison. So I did my PhD in Michigan, and I looked at residence halls. And so I think residence halls are really interesting because green campuses, or there's a trend towards green campuses. Green building practices are increasing on college campuses. They're part of this living laboratory of sustainability. And so we're asking in our research, how do these buildings live up to their potential as living laboratories for sustainability education? Residence halls are kind of interesting because they're these neat multifunctional environments. They're residential, obviously, but they're also places where people work, they study, they socialize there. We have a whole little community happening inside this one type of building. And so I did a follow-up study after my dissertation where we were doing a content analysis of all the signage related to sustainable design features and behavior across these 6 residence halls. And we found that overwhelmingly, I'll interpret these graphs for you. We have our 3 different kinds of values that could be leveraged in signage. And we also have our different kinds of knowledge that could be leveraged in signage. And then the colors here pertain to interpretation features or signage that relate to energy consumption in green, water in blue, material consumption in orange, or travel behaviors in gray. And we can see overwhelmingly, first of all, our material consumption behaviors get a much bigger piece of the pie in terms of the types of features and behaviors that get prompted or nudged to make people aware of in buildings. Energy, down here at the green line, actually very little do we communicate about energy consumption in buildings. The exception may be a sign by a light switch reminding people to turn it off. But increasingly, maybe as you know, in green buildings, a lot of that's automated. So people don't even perform that behavior anymore. We see overwhelmingly, like more so, the language around biospheric values is used. The least used values are egoistic, though those are significantly more likely to be the values held by traditional undergrad students. We see overwhelmingly, actually, procedural knowledge gets used a lot for materials signage and communication, because there's a lot of communication about how to sort appropriately. This is in another residence hall at the University of Missouri, and you can see a great example of typical signage. So they have their lead plaque there, and then they have their kind of nondescript blend into the background piece of signage right next to it. And on a recent project, and this is coming out soon, we went through the signage and coded for all of those characteristics that we included in the model. And so we see some connection to occupants by mentioning the campus history in the buildings. This piece of signage is informing people about the reuse of this exterior stone facade from the previous building that was standing there. And so it's proximate to the feature, and it does include some messaging variety. We get some declarative knowledge and social value orientations here. Talks about in order to preserve this part of our history, right? It's kind of social value orientation. So my colleagues and I'm gonna take you through, this might be the last example I give to make sure we have time for signage or discussion. My colleagues and I wanted to use our model for engaging signage to actually create a suite of interpretation features and install them in that residence hall where this feature was located. And this was at the University of Missouri. And so we were looking at how does a signage installation shape residents' green building knowledge and also their environmentally responsible behaviors. And it was a case study. We had a LEED Gold residence hall at University of Missouri, and we had a comparison non-green residence hall next door on the same campus. Programmatically, they were very similar. Same types of resident rooms and suites, same amenity spaces, but this case study residence hall was a little newer since the university had gone to setting a baseline for LEED buildings. And we created this evidence-based signage system and conducted some pre and post surveys with the building occupants where we installed the signage in the middle of the semester, and we had also observations and some resident interviews. So this tells us a little bit about the research design, just comparing the two buildings with a pre-survey and a behavioral observation, actually counting the numbers of students taking the stairs and sorting recycling both before and after the signage installation, and then interviews at the end. And we worked with several graphic design students to design this set of signage based on our model. And so we have some examples here about, I think we have a better picture of this in the next slide, but it says free workout steps away. So we're kind of appealing to that egoistic or health value framing. And then some information on the bottom about how much energy is saved by not taking the elevator and using the stairs instead. We have some signage to alert people to look down and actually see the green roof that is visible outside of the hallway. And then some interpretive features that give us some information about how on the wall here, these original doors from Johnston Hall were used to create this feature wall. And we included some QR codes for people to go there and learn more about the history of those features. So we are locating signage in proximity to the behavioral decision-making point. So not to take the elevator, but to use the stairs. We were looking at turning off the lights because there were still manual light switches in all the residence rooms, so they could take a poster and put it in their room. And then we intervened on a lot of water behaviors. There's much more water behaviors in a residence hall that occupants have control over rather than their energy, which is like taking the stairs, turning off the lights, maybe adjusting the thermostat in some residence halls, but not all. In terms of water, we can look at shower behavior. We can look at turning off the water while you fill up or while you wash your hands, brush teeth. And so we had those features, and then we installed some more. There was currently no procedural guidance to people about what would go in each of these containers. It just said trash, cans, plastic, or glass, cans, and plastic, but it's not all glass and it's not all plastic. So we created some diagrams here showing examples of the types of plastic products that people could use. And interestingly, I think we found the most rich information out of our qualitative analysis from survey questions when we asked people to identify some of the features of their sustainable building. And we had some students who took the survey in the pre-condition and in the post-condition, and these are comparing the same students across time. So let's look at how the richness of their knowledge has changed in that time. So I think this is really interesting. There's a lot of windows in our building. The third one down goes to large windows provide enough natural lighting in the room that there have only been a few times when I need to turn on the overhead lights. So they're taking that awareness of a feature and it's becoming really an understanding with an integration of how it intersects with their own behavior. There are water bottle refill stations. They mentioned the first time around, and the second time around, they elaborate to cut down on single-use water bottles. Like, why is that actually important? They go from a really generic, vague description of the bathrooms conserve water to the automatic sinks don't keep running if someone forgets to turn them off. And then we'll end with solar panels on the top. The building has solar panels too. We have solar panels that preheat the hot water to use less energy, because that's how they're using the solar panels in their building. So we see a lot of growth of the types of knowledge there. And we went from, in the pre-condition survey, only 8% of the respondents or responses included any kind of elaboration beyond just listing a feature, to 41% of the responses including this elaboration. So they're really picking up more quality information and knowledge in the post condition. We also asked students about how did you know about these energy saving features or water saving features? And only 2% of responses mentioned signage in the precondition. And there was signage already in this building, to 28% of the responses mentioning the signage in the post condition. So trying to get people's attention there was really helpful. So I'll show you a couple of slides from a current project that I've been consulting on, and we're in the process of collecting data. I'm working with an architect at Centerbrook Architects and Planners, and this is a recently opened LEED Platinum Environmental Education Center in Connecticut. And they didn't have any installed signage, and the building owner was really interested in, since it is an environmental education center and they're teaching a lot about the surrounding water ecology and the habitat of the area. They wanted to use the building as a teaching tool. And the architects and engineers are increasingly adding this type of service onto their design scope of designing some educational features. And fortunately, we were able to connect at a recent conference, and he used our framework to design the signage. So this is a nice schematic of some of the things that are going on in the building. They have permeable grass pavers to help with stormwater runoff, solar panels south-facing for the building's energy consumption. They have double pane glass with double low E coating to minimize solar heat gain inside the building, as well as a lot of local low impact materials. And we worked with the building owner to identify the features that we thought were most visible and that they would want to interpret for occupants, and worked with the model to design signage and evaluate the signage across the whole set. So here's some examples of what they ended up developing. Here we see one of the pieces for a green roof. So it's first of all like kind of an interesting shape that doesn't just blend in with the wall. They have a little schematic here that's actually showing you some really distilling down some interesting information about the process of how a green roof helps reduce stormwater runoff. And we include the QR code for people to learn information. There's a lot of children that go through this center, so the language was intentionally worded to be really simple and appeal to children. Yeah, it's an environmental education center in a wooded area along a waterway, along a river. Yeah. So a lot of walking paths around there. They did a piece around the linoleum floor, and this is great. We really thought about like, how can we actually appeal to some behaviors here? A linoleum floor doesn't ask us to do anything to it. It doesn't really ask for participation, right? Or to turn off a light. But we prompt here, choosing long-lasting non-toxic products like this one is great for your health, your bank account, and the planet. And like they can scan for more information. So that's something that people then can take to their home environment where they are making those decisions potentially about what may go in there. And then we talk about glass countertops made from recycled materials. We have an engagement question here. Do you have a bottle with you today? They have a local soda company there that sells their products in glass bottles. They say, put it into the recycling bin and who knows what it might turn into next. So that's some of our information there. So I hope to someday, maybe I'll get to come back here and share some of this data with you, but we're collecting the pre-installation data right now about what are the features that people are aware of in the building, because there's currently no interpretation features. And then we'll be installing these over the winter and collecting some post-installation data with occupants and visitors of the center next semester. And so that's what I'll leave us with here today is what does your green building say? And maybe we need to encourage it to speak up a little bit, speak a little louder. So that's it. I'll finish and leave us for questions.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, I was going to point out that a lot of the features that are in that building in Maryland that you depicted can be seen at the Wisconsin Discovery Institute.
Yes.
A lot of emphasis on water and also the so-called Mesozoic gardens and
Mhm.
many interesting outdoor inducing features there.
Yeah, one feature I've always loved at the WID is on the south side of the building, on the exterior, there's this really interesting walking path where you're walking and it has motion censored kind of chimes
Yes.
that are going off, which kind of ties in with this mindful awareness component, really getting you to think about where you are, be present in the space, which is kind of interesting in terms of a multi-sensory engagement.
Right.
Yeah, I love that space. I think there's a reason it's so popular for people who just want to go in there and use it as a place to study or
Yes,
work
yeah.
or casually meet up with people. Yeah.
Couple of questions online. Got a question from Bob. So it's I'll read it and then you can respond. So it says, we start with these large urban or high traffic spaces based on scale to build, occupy, communicate, and influence behaviors. Have there been any thoughts about application to smaller spaces in rural areas, homes, etc.? After construction costs, I imagine the cultural touch points could be a significant communications challenge. Changing consumer fashion cycles must matter as well. Once built, update costs must be considered too. Do you have any comments to that?
Okay, so thinking first about scale, about a lot of these projects being much larger scale and then thought about translation to smaller scale places. I mean, I think there is a lead for homes. So part of what initially interested me in this work was one of the credits in the LEED certification is innovation and design, and you can get a credit for occupant education features. I don't know if that's also available for homes, but it might be. I am aware of several or a couple of LEED certified homes in the Madison area that open their home for tours to students. And so I think there's, definitely an opportunity there to leverage the potential of smaller scale private projects if people are interested in sharing some of the innovation that's been incorporated into their projects. And I also, when I was doing my PhD at Michigan, there was a really active engineering group that was doing a lot of work around net zero and net zero energy and also water use, net zero water on in residential projects. And we had a test case home down the street from me that opened up their home to these engineering students who, once a calendar year would come to a project in the home to learn about installing those kinds of things in smaller footprint projects. So I think those options are there. I don't know if I answered all the questions embedded in that larger question. There was a lot of richness there.
I think that, might have addressed more of the first part of that. I think the second part is sort of like, there's kind of cycles of what sort of in style, and so like, how do you adapt over time?
In terms of the communication features, well, I think, one thing that's really interesting that we're kind of looking at now is how do we think about using multimedia and digital communication to incorporate engaging features, whether that's augmented reality or virtual reality, making things that are otherwise hidden and invisible in the building, making those things visible for people through maybe an AR overlay or something like that. I mean, that definitely seems to be on trend and of the moment, but I think you have a lot of opportunities when you're thinking about using digital features where you can update the information more readily or change some of the design features of the signage if it's on kind of a digital screen. You can always update the information that's linked up through the QR code. So I think there's some options there.
And, another question is, did you measure pre and post locus of control as it relates to climate change? Like how much the occupants felt like they had locus of control in their ability to affect climate change?
I measured, so in the study where we installed the signage in the residence hall, where we created the signage and installed it, and we did a pre and post measure. We didn't do locus of control, but a very similar neighbor construct called perceived behavioral control. Locus of control is kind of more large scale, how we feel in general about, man, life just is so hard for me. I can't, everything keeps messing everything up for me versus I'm in control of my destiny. We looked at perceived behavioral control of specific behaviors. So I have the ability to conserve energy in this building, or conserving energy within this building is within my grasp. And we did that across like material conservation and water. We did not find any change in perceived behavioral control post signage intervention. In the survey, though, we saw that theme emerge in our occupant interviews. So that's something that we're exploring in terms of how do we operationalize that in the survey, because it did seem like a theme that we were seeing in the interviews themselves.
I did have a question. Just ask it. So I'm curious if, not just in green buildings, but is there at all an effort to do things like the signage to say, hey, take the stairs, to happen in buildings, you know, across campus, or, you know, in general, to think about energy saving things that could just be enacted anywhere? And then sort of secondarily, like in this building, there's a whole wing of offices of the staff where the elevator's at the other end of the building, so it really encourages you to go up and down the stairs.
Mhm.
I'm just curious if you've seen that in some of the green building designs as well.
Yeah, so I'll start with your second question, which is about, kind of gets to the point, I don't know if they did that intentionally, like, putting the stairs closer to you, so it kind of incentivizes stair use and, decentivizes using the elevator, which is less convenient. In that biophilic design project, they really focused, from an architectural perspective, on making this central wide open staircase be really inviting. They really wanted to promote the stair use, and the elevator, this is kind of against conventional wisdom and what you typically see in buildings. The elevator is tucked away and less visible, so they're not making that a convenient option for people. Which has some trade-offs in terms of accessibility, because some people need the elevator. So we, you know, do still need to think about making it accessible for people who need to get it. I've seen, just anecdotally, I haven't included this in any of my research, looking at kind of environmental behavior nudging in non-green buildings. I mean, we definitely see that at the previous institution I was at in Texas, where the building had no recycling. There were actually a good amount of prompts and posters around taking the stairs, but also housed within that School of Human Ecology was a personal health or nutrition. So there's a lot of obesity research going on there, so health behaviors. So a lot of the framing of values there was egoistic value of health and nutrition, cardiac health, and how many calories can be burned by taking a flight of stairs, stuff like that. So there's different ways to kind of leverage that, but I haven't personally looked at studies much on green buildings.
Maybe I'll ask the final question online, as we're at time here, but Kurt asks, have you looked at the challenges and impacts of cost on these more effective communication tactics? They all seem to understandably utilize high graphic design quality.
Yeah, really great question. So like I mentioned in the last case study I showed, they were able to get a small grant to fund the additional scope of having the architect design these pieces of signage. So that's definitely a barrier to projects, especially projects that may be more like public interest or, civic community design. I'm doing a project right now looking at sustainable public libraries. And in the case studies we're looking at in that project, we've identified 6 across the US and Canada that are LEED Gold or above certified that include signage about their building. And a lot of the signage was created by someone in-house. So it was the sustainability coordinator, or it was the public outreach and communication specialist. So a lot of this work is being done kind of ad hoc by somebody who's passionate about it. As a side note, one of my collaborators and I are applying for an NSF grant right now for advancing informal STEM learning. That would actually result in us creating a toolkit of template signage that would be open access for people to use and customize and adapt for their green buildings. So hopefully that cost would be reduced in the future if we're able to do that project.
I think we're at time, but thank you so much again for your presentation and for.
All right. Yeah, thank you all. Appreciate it.
And for those joining online, we'll see you again in 2 weeks for our final seminar of the semester.